more importantly, as I'll talk. So certain hadith about fitna. What is a fitna? Okay, a fitna, the verb fatana, with a ta, not with a ta. Okay, fatana has a different meaning than fatana. Fatana basically is like when you smelt an iron, or sorry, when you smelt ore, okay, like a metal ore, you smelt it, you melt it down, and you remove the metal from the rest of the impurities in the rock, right? So you're basically, it's as if you're extracting the best of what's in there from the ore, you're extracting the metal, which is the best of what's in that ore, the rest is all rock, dirt, or other minerals, for example, that you don't need. So that's the core meaning of fatana, okay? That you're basically purifying rock, you're purifying metal. It's purification. It's almost like purification or taking the best out of you. And then also afterwards, because of that meaning, it also means ikhtabara, to test people, to extract the best from us, right? The purpose of a test is to get the best out of you, the best that you can do, essentially. So most books of hadith, you will find a chapter called Kitab al-Fitn. Okay, usually the signs of the end of times are called fitn. Why? Because people, the reason why so many hardships will occur at the end of times, so many severe hardships, like Dajjal, for example, okay, is to extract who are the real believers and who are not, right? حتى يميز الله الخبيث من الطيب, right? So, what was the verse? Anyways, so numerous verses in the Quran allude to this, right? That one of the reasons we encounter hardships in this life is that so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see, of course He knows already beforehand, but it's for us to know who is the best amongst us and who is not. And for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also to become deserving of reward or deserving of punishment in the afterlife, right? So this is the basis for fitan, right? We talked about this last week, we touched upon this, that the life of a Muslim that we're expected to lead is not supposed to be one of perfection, not supposed to be one of utopia. That's for Jannah, right? That good life, that sort of, which for us living here and also in the world nowadays, is usually affected by that notion of the American dream, right? We all deserve a house and a car and, family and kids and everything. We get that from Hollywood. We get that from the place around us. We get that from the culture that has permeated all over the world at the moment, right? And as we talked about last week, qana'a, being content, it's not the same thing, right? The good life that a Muslim will lead will be a life of contentment, not fulfilling all of our desires. That happens in Jannah. So fitan, in that case, okay, is related to this. That what is the function of trials and hardships that happen in life? And this is just a small selection of these hadith, okay? So for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, مثل المؤمن كمثل الزرع لا تزال الريح تميله. I'm going to skip here, I don't need it forever. So the example of a believer is like that of crops, okay? That the wind makes it sway and bend. And, the believer will always be afflicted by hardships. That's the nature. Like they'll be swaying in the wind. They'll be jostled here and there, blown about. They'll be affected by hardships. Then they'll continue to. That will always be the case of a believer. They'll be affected by hardships. وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ, the hypocrite. And munafiq and hypocrite, by the way, we use the word hypocrite to explain the word munafiq. To basically translate it, but hypocrite is actually an inaccurate translation. Right? There is no word for munafiq, one word. Technically, there's no one word for munafiq in the English language, right? Unless you go to find some sort of biblical equivalent, which I don't think exists. Munafiq is someone who disbelieves in their heart, but they portray themselves as believers. Okay, that's what a munafiq is, sorry. And the hypocrite doesn't really fully capture that. Yes, part of nifaq, part of being a munafiq is that you're two-faced, right? You show people one thing, but something in a way or something else. But it's specifically referring to the fact that the person is not really a believer at heart. Belief is just on what they show to people. Okay, so the believers are like crops, right? They sway in the wind and they're afflicted by different issues, problems, difficulties. As for the munafiq, they're like a tree that is firm. لا تهتزوا حتى تستحسن. That they will not move, they'll be firmly in place until somebody comes along and sort of farms them and reaps them and takes them away. What that means is that, the believer is someone who is going to be jostled around. They're going to be tested. When you see people, and again, I think somebody asked this question, like, should you want to be tested? No, right? Just because you're going through a good time is also a test, right? Are you going to use that good time to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a time of ease, a time of plenty? Are you going to use it to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or are you going to use that and are you going to squander it and waste it in chasing the dunya, right? So even a good time is still a test. Rather, you don't look at what time you're going through. Is it a good time or a bad time? You look at your deeds and you look at your heart, your sincerity. So the munafiq is like a tree. They don't seem to be affected by anything. They seem to be thriving, right? وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَهُمْ تُعْجِبُكَ أَجْسَامَهُم, right? That when you see them, they're for example, they're very attractive, or their bodies are very appealing. They're attractive people, right? That the munafiq from the outside, it seems like they're living a good life, but they're not, right? They're actually going through a lot of, disease in their hearts. They're going through a lot of confusion. They're going through a lot of problems, and they know the solution because they know Islam, but they're ignoring it, right? They don't want to believe it because the dunya is more appealing to them. So that's the example given here. And it's not, this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, okay? But it's not a hadith that gets mentioned often, which I think is important, right? That, like I said, the believers are being jostled around by test after test, difficulty after difficulty. As for the munafiq, they remove themselves from this, right? And so the munafiqun, what do? They say, these people who are going to war or they're spending their money for the sake of Allah, I don't want to be like them, right? They're just being foolish stuff. And in Surah Al-Baqarah as well, the beginning, right? What are the munafiqeen doing? Like they look down on the believers, like they're going through all these hardships, they're going through all these things. It's not going to get them anywhere. They're wasting their time. But that's nifaq, right? One of the signs of nifaq is that it holds you back from generosity and it holds you back from expending your time in the sake of Allah as well. So that's one hadith, okay, about fitan. Another one, ما يزال البلاء بالمؤمن والمؤمنة في نفسه وولده وماله حتى يلقى الله وما عليه خطيئة. That the believer, the believing man and the believing woman will keep going through hardships, keep going through difficulties in their nafs, their life, their children, their wealth, until they meet Allah and they have no sins left. Right? And this is why I've said many times, I'm not sure if I said it here, I've said many times, in like outside, especially in my other classes, I really think the people in Gaza right now are amongst the best of us, right? We should really reflect on this. We look at believers in Muslim countries or the East going through a lot of hardships, right? Poverty, destitution, starvation. They're sort of being patient, issues in their countries with the, all these earthquakes happen. Why? All of a sudden, it seems to me, Allahu Alam, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves these people. Okay, and we have to really ask ourselves, and I don't want to, again, I have a lot of experiences living when I was in Saudi and Cairo and stuff. And, I really wonder, like I don't want to put you down. Yeah, I don't want to put myself down either. But I think we have to reflect on this. I'll tell you this, okay? Don't take it the wrong way. I just feel need to say it. One of the things I was told when I was studying abroad was that certain scholars don't like Western students. And the reason for that was, they said they come to class and they think they know everything. And it takes them a while. Some of them don't figure out that they don't know everything, and it takes them a while to adjust to the fact that you need to learn. You need to start from scratch, for example, right? And I remember this is one of the earliest advices given to me by another student who was also from Canada. he gave me this advice, right? He said, don't think, you remember, when you come into the Arabic world, you're learning Islam from a traditional way, more, scholarly way, you have to start from zero. Don't pretend like you know stuff. And it was very important advice, to be honest, because I learned more that way, right? I pretended, because I studied a lot when I was here. I used to go to a lot of classes and read a lot of books. I was known even before I left for that. But, I pretend when I got there, I just, in my head, I was like, you know what? I'm nothing. I'm going to start as baby steps, even if, like some of these books that we scholars teach, people think it's really advanced. Like there's a book called Durusul Balagha. Balagha is Arabic rhetoric. It's usually what you study after Arabic grammar, right? And when somebody's studying Balagha, people who don't know, if you've ever heard of Balagha, or somebody says, I'm studying Balagha, Arabic rhetoric, they're like, oh wow, you're studying Balagha? That's so impressive. So I was teaching this Balagha text last year online. And in the beginning of the text, the author says, multiple authors, it's like that's a 300-year-old book. They said, we wrote this book for children, right? And everyone's so excited to be studying Balagha in that class. They're like, oh, we're studying Balagha. Finally, we get to Balagha, right? This advanced topic. And then the author says in the introduction that I wrote this for children, right? So, but what I was getting to here is that, I really think we should reflect on if the relative amount of ease and comfort we live in the West. We want to make sure that relative ease and comfort is not counted against us on Yawm al-Qiyamah. We want to make sure we make use of every single opportunity we have here, not to squander it. You don't have to, like, as our parents, take the education and go back, right? I don't mean that. What I mean more is like, you do something meaningful Islamically, religiously, and spiritually with your life. You don't squander the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And I think that's very important for us, especially here. Right? Because, we live, if you've been to, I don't know when the last time you went back home is. When I was in Cairo, I was walking back home from class. And I remember there was this kid who was like 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that range. And there's this kid with, there's a kid basically, so there's a car parked, okay, parallel parked next to a curb. The kid's sitting on the curb and his head's against the tire of the car and he's just sleeping, he's passed out. And there's a bucket next to him and a sponge. So he'd been cleaning cars the whole day, right? And he was so exhausted that he just passed out against the tire of the car, right? And I just, I remember thinking to myself, like, subhanAllah, because when I was in Cairo, I went as soon as the currency crashed. It went from like $1 for 5 Egyptian pounds to 15. So I became rich overnight, right? So I felt very spoiled over there. But subhanAllah, when I saw the people over there, how they live, and then when you go to Pakistan as well, right? Same thing. You realize how blessed we are. And one of the problems of living here is that you don't see poverty. That's very dangerous, right? When you don't see poverty, poverty is just like sort of an idea or a symbol. That's very dangerous because you automatically take what you have for granted. Whereas if you see poor people every day, right? And by poor, I mean visibly poor, like destitute. Like, one of the uncles I used to pass by every day going to class in Cairo, the uncle who used to sleep, like he had a wooden cart, just selling bananas, like a bunch for like 2 Egyptian pounds, which is nothing. And he used to sleep there as well, every day. That was his schedule, right? And Pakistan, when you go to Karachi, for example, you go back home to Karachi, for example, everyone goes to defense, right? Or sorry for the malfunction, right? Like the upscale area. Same thing with Cairo. People go back to like New Cairo, Fifth Settlement, okay? Like the upscale places with the big houses and the malls that are like, remind you of Dubai and stuff. Actually, Cairo's malls were scary. I've never seen malls as big as like that in my life, right? But you go back there, but you don't actually realize that the vast majority of the city is not like that. It's really poor. But a lot of the Westerners who live here and they go back and visit, they don't see those places, right? So like most of Karachi and Cairo are slums, vast majority of those cities, right? And we don't see that. We only see the more built up places, for example. So, yeah, I do really believe that, people who are going through all these hardships, especially in Muslim countries and even here, right? I really do think, a lot of them are better than us, to be honest. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only test them if He loves them, right? And if you're not, again, I'm not saying it's a bad sign to not be tested, but if you're not tested in some way, it doesn't have to be like outrageous hardships, then it's really something to be worried about, right? Imam Shafi'i, for example, his students said, we've never seen anybody who used to get as sick as much as him, right? And he died at a young age too, right? So very important stuff. But again, it's just touching the tip of the iceberg, right? Then another hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this is the famous hadith, a lot of people know this, right? That the affairs of the believer are wondrous. All of their affairs are good. And that's not that only happens for the believer. If they go through hardship, they are thankful and it becomes good for them. Sorry, if they go through good times, then they're thankful and that's good for them. And if they go through hardships, then they're patient and that becomes good for them too. So the believer is not someone, like we said this last week, not someone who fluctuates in times of hardship and times of ease. Right? In fact, the opposite is demonstrated in the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes those who, when they're on the ship, for example, right, they're suddenly terrified because of the seas and the storms, and they start calling out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but when they finally reach a shore, like, yeah, forget it. All that deen in Islam we're talking about, right? The example nowadays when the plane hits turbulence, right? I know I'm one of those people, right? Plane hits turbulence, I'm freaking out. I'm like, ya Allah, just get us out in the. I actually memorize the hadith now. I make a special dua. I've actually memorized it now because the amount of times it happens. Allahumma awsidna bisalam. Right? Anyways, the whole point is, right? So like, we need to make sure that we're not like that though. That in times of hardship and times of ease, our deeds are consistent. I'm giving sadaqah in times of hardship, even if it's just like $10. I'm giving sadaqah in times of ease, $2,000, $3,000, whatever, $1,000. Right? Same thing with my salawat. My salawat don't get affected by times of hardship. They don't get affected by times of ease. In both, they're the same. Like my shahwat don't take me away from hardship when I'm going through good. And my despair in Allah's mercy does not take me away from worship and obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in times of difficulty. Both are extremely important. Then another hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-ibadatu fil haraji ka-hijratin ilayya." Worshipping Allah in haraj, times of fitna, times of difficulty, are like making hijrah, migrating to Him. So worshipping Allah in these times of great distress, great hardship, that's not like worshipping Allah at other times. Right? Like if you're going through like serious hardship and you're still dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you really, sort of, one of the things, I'm not putting down any political activism whatsoever here, okay? I recently discovered, I just forgot, okay, that I had written an article, blog article like two years ago it was called Taqwa for Palestine. Yeah, because I used to participate in Palestinian activism initiatives, right? In university, like I wasn't part of the MSA, I was part of this other group, the National Muslims for Peace and Justice. So I used to do a lot of activism work, and all of our activism back then was Palestinian because of our president, by the way. Yes, president, that is. Anyways, so most of our activism about Palestine, and one of the things I remember was a lot of people participating in the Palestinian protests. They were forgetting about themselves, right? And we have to make sure that, yes, we need to protest, we need to be involved in political activism, but the minute you forget that what eventually is going to lead to victory is not us, it's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it. I mean, if you reflect carefully, the Muslims, the early Muslims, some of the Romans described them as naked. Because they literally some of them had no clothes. That's how poor they were. The Umar series, if you have seen that, right, is very fictional, right? They show them like all these, like the Umar has like 3 robes on it. No, they didn't have that. It's actually a funny story. How much time do we have? I'm going into that 20 minutes. So there's actually a funny story. It's in Bukhari, right? There was a village in central Arabia. The only person who could lead the salah there was a child, right? It was a young child. He was the only one who knew enough Quran to lead the prayer. So when the kid used to, I don't know if I should translate this fully. When the kid used to go into, the kid had so few clothes on him. When he used to go into sujood, his backside would show. Okay, to the point where a woman called out one time. A woman just got fed up. She called out from the back, "Someone please save us from this kid." She said, "Use the word anus." Okay, okay, this is Bukhari, right? And the reason why she's like, they had nothing. Okay, so how were these people able to conquer the Roman and Persian Empire? If you read the history carefully, not just of the Muslims, but of the Romans and Persians at that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the conditions for victory. Right? It's very important to understand this, that the conditions were created for victory. Right when the Muslims were about to go into Persia, there was a leadership crisis in the Persian Empire. The Persian emperor died, and they were running around frantically trying to find a successor. I think his daughter or someone was put in place, and then there was a whole court intrigue going on between her and somebody else, right? And the generals, because of that, were fed up and frustrated as well. So the whole thing was basically a mess. Romans as well, they had been going through a lot of sort of religious conflict between different Christian understandings, especially in the Syrian area, right? So again, there was a lot of that's why when the Muslims came in and they liberated Damascus, excuse me, from the Romans and Jerusalem, they were welcomed. Why? Because the Romans had been treating them so badly for the past century or so, right? So the conditions were put in place by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for victory to occur. And that's something we should never forget, that, simply, we have to be deserving of the conditions for victory, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to create those, that the positive end, the victory is for the muttaqeen, the people of taqwa. And taqwa is what leads to victory, right? Doesn't just apply to us as individuals, that whoever has taqwa of Allah, He will make a way out for them. It's not just for us as individuals, it's for the ummah as a whole, right? And people get fed up with this sometimes. They're like, something's going on in the world, really serious about Muslims. They're like, what do you mean just pray salah? No, I'm not saying just pray salah. Do your fard kifaya, do community activity, do public political activism as well. But you have to remember that the only way we're actually getting out of this is taqwa in the end, right? And if you look at the amount of people in our ummah who have wealth and they squander it on dunya, just materialism stuff, they have knowledge, PhDs, whatever, and they use it for nothing productive for the ummah, basically, right? What is the end result of that? These are people who have the necessary skills, but they're not doing it, right? So very important, right? So al-ibadatu fil haraji ka hijratin ilayya, that worship in these times of great calamity, great catastrophe, is like migrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then, of course, the famous hadith, and I use this nowadays. I think it's very important to reflect. One of the problems with understanding hadith, by the way, is people, and this is partly due to weak Arabic language skills, but also weak analytical skills in general, okay? Language, being good in language, and this is why I recommend, even if you're not studying Arabic, your English language skills should at least be really good, right? And even then, and you should try to develop analytical, critical thinking skills. You don't have to do philosophy, although that helps a lot. But you need to have critical thinking skills to think through words and text properly. Otherwise, if you don't do that, the only people who are going to be able to have that level of analysis of text are who? Lawyers and politicians, right? And you don't want to be in that state where you're not able to do that. And that's one of the problems, by the way, with STEM, this whole emphasis on STEM, is that science, technology, engineering, math, is that everyone goes into the natural sciences, and people who have the social sciences are the ones who end up in government positions, and then they run everything, and we have no idea what's going on. Like, one of the worst people who can interpret, the scientists and doctors are some of the, and I know a lot of doctors, right? A lot of friends from university, they are some of the worst people when it comes to understanding law. And I'm just going to say this, it's very true, okay? Because they just don't understand the phenomenon of law, right? So, so this hadith, okay, famous hadith, He said all the nations, they're about to basically cooperate with each other against you. Just like many people come to a plate of food and they eat together. Okay, they're about to devour you. Just like people devour a plate of food. A community comes together, like in Arab countries, for example, communal plate, and they devour that food. And the Prophet ﷺ was asked, and he said, the Prophet said, there will come a time where this happens. And the Prophet ﷺ was asked, will this be because we're few in number? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no. Rather, that day you will be many, you will be great in number. وَلَكِنَّكُمْ غُثَاءٌ كَغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ. You will be like the foam of the sea, tossed. Again, this whole imagery of being, subject to basically the winds and the seas. You're just being thrown around. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away from the hearts of your enemies fear of you. That your enemies will no longer fear you. They will not care about what you're, because to be honest, you're capable of nothing at that point. And look at today, for example, we have no political, people get depressed about this, but this is a sign of the Prophet's truth of Nabuwah, right? That we come to a point that Muslims are so weak. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. It is something to be upset about, but it's also something to realize that the Prophet Sadaqa Rasulullah, right? He was telling us the truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away from your enemies fear of you. وَلَيَقْذِفَنَّ اللَّهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمُ الْوَهْنَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cast into your hearts weakness. Now, what is this weakness? Okay. فَقَالَ قَائِلٌ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَمَا الْوَهْنُ. What is this weakness, Ya Rasulullah? And he said, love of the dunya وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ, and hating death. Right? To love the dunya and dislike death. Basically being attached to this life. Now, one of the things, this last point here, is very important to think carefully about this. A lot of times, and people always, it's not always, but some people call me out, they're like, why are you accusing Muslims all the time? Why aren't you accusing the disbelievers of what they're doing and whatnot? I'm like, the problem is not really them. We are in the position we are right now because of our condition. You keep blaming the enemy, right? Or whoever is oppressing you, they're always going to do that, right? I'm not sure what was his name, but what's it called? وَلَنْ تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. That the Jews and Christians will not be pleased with you until you follow their religion. So the oppressors will always be there. Colonialism has been there forever, right? Since like the 1600s almost, or the 1500s if you count Andalus, right? Colonialism has been there for ages. There's nothing new. But what is going to change the tide? It is the condition of our own selves, right? And if the condition, if you get angry against, like, you guys saw the whole Bonnie Crombie video, right? I mean, like, people like swearing in the background. I'm like, what are you doing, dude? Like, how is that going to solve anything, right? I mean, and this is a phenomenon of, I guess you could say, there's a book, by the way, I'm not sure if you guys have heard this. It's by this person called Pankaj Mishra. It's called The Age of Anger. No? Okay, this is written like just the beginning of Trump's rule, okay? It's very important to read, especially for your generation as well, to understand why our generation is doing what they are, okay? The age of anger means what? That people are just, with a lot of the things that are happening today is just because we're angry. We're angry even though we have high standards. I mean, in the West, for example, people have generally high standards of living. They are upset with some of the imbalances of power, etc. But to be honest, for the most part, people in the West are relatively fine. So why are they angry? It's just discontent, right? Now, what ends up happening with that is you tend to get angry at others, not yourself, right? Because to be angry at yourself is inconvenient. Why? Because you have to change yourself now, right? If you're angry at yourself, if you're upset at yourself, I did something wrong, I'm doing something I should fix, that's cumbersome, that's inconvenient, because I have to do something about it. It's very easy to blame someone else. And of course, they might be fully deserving of blame. But is that really what's going to change things? This is even mentioned in like these self-help books, like what's it called? Stephen Covey's, I read it back in the university. 7 highly effective, what is it? habits of highly effective people, right? One of them was something like this. He said, and the gist of it was, you can't change other people, but you can change how you react to it, right? And that's, again, same principle. Like, we can change what we are, we can change who we are. You can't always change the situation. So a lot of the anger nowadays about what's happening, and the despair and the sadness and the grief that you're experiencing, and when you're seeing this stuff online, put it into positive energy by doing something with it, right? Doing something useful with it. And we've talked about that before. So, and of course, حب الدنيا وكراهية الموت means what? That your life afterwards does not just become about dunya. When you graduate, you start working. By the way, one of the biggest fitnas is that first paycheck, the first year of paychecks after you graduate. I'm telling you right now. I'm not sure about your generation. You might go through the same stuff I did. 1 year of unemployment first. Okay, considering the way the economy is going. Who knows? Allahu Alam. Okay. But that first paycheck, that first job, that first rush of money that comes in that first year, how you conduct yourself with your money in that first year is going to dictate a lot of things for the rest of your life, right? Would you use your money? Do you use your career for good? Or do you just end up buying stuff? All the things your parents never wanted you to get, right? You start buying all that stuff, right? I'm guilty of it too, to be honest. But the thing is, unfortunately, I started working in Saudi. Okay, so you can imagine, I had more money than was good for me, to be honest. Very important, right? That what is the problem? If we're talking about the weakness of the ummah, we first have to look at ourselves. Right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change the condition of the people until they change what is in themselves. Then another hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, I should mention this because who knows Sheikh Salman al-Auda? Does you know anyone? Man goes to jail, everyone forgets about it. Okay, I got this book from him. Okay, so he's in jail right now. I know I've met 2 scholars in Saudi who are in jail. So there's a hadith here. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna min a'zam al-jihad kalimat 'adlin 'inda sultan ja'ir." That one of the greatest forms of jihad is to speak a word of justice, of truth, with an oppressive ruler. Right? And the person who gave me this book, he's in jail because of that, to be honest. Writing to MPs is one thing, right? But also, like these whole protests and stuff like that, people, it's really, I admire people who have like regular day jobs and going to this stuff. Because, if you get caught on camera, you can easily lose your job and stuff. A lot of people are losing their jobs. I think it's very, inspiring, inshallah, to see that happening before us. But I just wanted to mention that because it's related to the person who gave me this book. What else can I mention from here? Now, another thing that becomes important. During these times of great hardship, especially in the ummah, political stuff especially, something that happens is people, unfortunately, get carried away with their anger and go against either scholars or go against even their fellow believers. Okay. Now, a lot of people think that, look, I lived in the Middle East. One of the things we knew, I don't want to get into too much details because it's a university as well. But let's just say I've seen a lot of weird things involving Arab intelligence agencies and stuff, right? Let's just say a lot of Muslim countries have a vested interest in trying to delegitimize Islamic scholarship. Okay, they have like a serious interest in that, and they put a lot of money towards that. Okay, and this was something well known in Saudi, well known in Egypt as well. Egypt is a front page news, to be honest. So that's number one. Number two, people starting to hurt other Muslims. They start to see other Muslims as a threat. So again, taking that, you're looking for somebody to be angry at, right? You have to focus on yourself. You can't just take it out on someone else. And that's unfortunately where this extremism comes from. People are angry, they're hurt, and they're looking to lash out, they're looking to get back, they're looking to ease that pain, and they end up easing that by taking it out on someone else. So this is where these extreme interpretations of Islam come from. And a lot of people think these are, terrorism is just something. And I'm going to say this because when I was in Saudi and Cairo, like literally when I was there was stuff happening, like explosions and suicide bombings and stuff like that, right? A lot of people think these are not real. These are real people doing, unfortunately, real things. Okay, like these people do. Of course, it is unjust to blame all Muslims for this, which is what Islamophobes and all these right-wing people do. But the phenomenon does exist, right? And it's something I don't want to say too much because I get flagged. But let's just say, those people are real. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, those people are real. And so here the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man hamila alayna as-silaha falaysa minna, wa man ghashana falaysa minna." That whoever takes up arms against their own believer, against us, being the believers. So whoever from the believers takes up arms against the believers, then they're not from us. And whoever cheats us, man ghashana falaysa minna. Whoever cheats us and deceives us is also not from us. So deceiving other believers, fighting other believers, not just with weapons, right? If you just start turning yourself against fellow believers, for some reason scholars nowadays get attacked a lot. Even though scholars are the ones going to jail a lot of times for speaking up as well, right? That's basically people are removing themselves. No, I'm not saying they're kafir, but they're removing themselves from the protection of the Ummah of Prophet ﷺ and doing that. Okay? We might continue this next week. I think next week is the last session. Okay? Yeah. So we might continue the same chapter next week. But it's helpful when we go through these situations. The first place we should be looking for advice on what to do in these situations is the Quran and Sunnah. Right? What did the Prophet ﷺ say about hardships? What do you say about these kind of difficult times? We should be looking for those answers first in the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the Quran, of course, as well. Okay, I'll just put one more because related to what I said before. Okay, sabab al-muslimi fusuqun wa qitaluhu kufrun. They're basically insulting believers and shatam like insulting, cursing believers is fisq, like sin, and fisq is like not just sin but like outrageous sin. وَقِتَالُهُ كُفْرٌ, and fighting them is kufr. Okay, so again, showing us the similar theme, right? No, sorry, it's very hard to choose what exactly to do for this. So, kind of best. Any questions? Yes.
So she mentioned at the point of whoever is coming from Allah makes a way out.
Yes.
I want specificity on what a way out means, because it doesn't always necessarily mean that you don't succumb to a hardship or you don't succumb to a test. Like, for example, and I need to come in the sense that, like, if someone falls ill, like there's a hardship, but they die from that illness, that doesn't mean Allah doesn't help them.
Yeah.
So then how should I interpret a way out?
A way out means what? A way out means a way out in terms of like whatever is best for that person, right? I mean, like someone who has taqwa and they fall ill and they pass away as a result of the illness, but they had taqwa. That's a good sign for them, technically, in the sense that, we have to stop thinking in terms of like limited terms, right? This dunya. Just because somebody passes away, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. If it's a person's of taqwa, then it's a good thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said what in Hadith Qudsi, that it's not meant literally, but the throne of Ar-Rahman shakes when a believer life is taken. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that person. He put them through that difficulty, that hardship, and He took them into His Rahman. Right? What they're experiencing at that point is much more beautiful than any worldly life they could have had. And so taqwa is it doesn't have to be like a positive effect in a material sense.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, for example, if they have people and then we go out for relief, right? Obviously, I'm thinking, I know you said don't materialism, but obviously in that state, I would want material relief. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best option for me, because Allah wants that. But if I'm making dua or I'm having patience when I'm having
Yeah.
hardship, how should I live it? How should I have?
Well, let me give you an example, okay? I'm sure there's a lot of people's minds here because I used to make a joke. Muslim Student Association actually means marriage student associations, okay? Because like everybody in my MSA got married to each other, like except me. I was like, what's going on, right? Anyways, it was just funny, right? But I'll give you a marriage example because it's actually a good one. Somebody a shaykh told this, right? He said, listen, you could have taqwa, you could obey your parents in marriage, you could do everything right that you're supposed to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws and rules and ethics when it comes to marriage. But you get married, you listen to your parents, you got married to whoever they wanted you to get married, right? Whatever, you try to be the best, Muslim you could during that whole process, but your marriage still falls apart and you get divorced. Not the end of the world. That experience was, in the end, istikhara is very important. Whatever you do, you make istikhara. If you read if you understand the actual dua for istikhara, read the translation, reflect on it very well. And this is why we should do istikhara for everything. If you did istikhara sincerely, whatever happens because of that, be content with it because it is what was best for you. Even if it ended up in material terms looking really bad and feeling terrible. But it was actually a really good learning lesson, for example. You learned a lot from that experience. Or you, for example, changed as a person in a positive way because of that experience. It happens a lot, right? So, we should never look at a loss of material. So like you said, that doesn't mean in a material sense, right? It means in a material and immaterial, like akhirah sense as well, right? So hardships, like fitness, they're meant to take the best out of you. And extract what's good in you and purify it.
Instead of saying, okay, or it's going to be an exit plan.
Yeah.
It's like, if I have taqwa, if I have sabr and attachment, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will lead me to the best door. That door might be in the akhirah, or that door might be in this one, but either way, there are good consequences in the akhirah.
And that's what truly matters in the end, right? Look, none of us know how long we're going to be around for. My dad's 70 now. And, I had this conversation with him, right? I'm like, because he's bored, he doesn't know what to do, right? So I'm like, I think towards the and stuff, right? So I'm like, Dad, just do a university degree. And he gave it some thought. He's like, yeah, maybe because I had the conversation. I'm like, what if I'm like, I told my dad, because he's 70, right? Sometimes he gets like all morbid, like, old people, right? Like, life's almost coming to an end. What am I going to do now? I'm like, Dad, what if you live until 100? He said, that's 30 years more. Like, what am I going to do? He got more scared of that then, right? So it's, we never know when we're going to die. It could be tomorrow. It could be when we're 30. It could be when we're 40, 50. Who knows, right? And what matters in the end is where we end up. Right? And somebody could pass away at the age of 20 and be much higher in rank than a person who passes away at the age of 50, 60, 70. Many cases like that, right? So, whatever the case may be, right? It doesn't mean in a material sense. It means in the akhirah sense specifically, and also material as well, right? But again, like we look at it in a material thing, right? So we should be careful about that. Yeah. The materialism affects, living here, the materialism affects our interpretation of the Quran Sunnah as well. Whenever we say, this whole, who's heard this thing, like, we follow Islam, not culture. Okay, you live in a culture too. There is no interpretation without culture. You cannot remove culture from interpretation. People who are like social science and stuff, right? It's a little bit too much of it. But you cannot interpret a text without a context. And if you're living here, there's still a context. A lot of times what happens is, I was talking to some of the brothers here, I forgot who, right? I think you're not here today. They were like, we came here and we learned more about Islam. And back home is like culture is what affects how Islam is interpreted. Culture affects Islam, how Islam is interpreted here too. Right? We tend to interpret the Quran and Sunnah in very materialistic ways. Right? That's just one thing. Other things as well, like individualism. We tend to interpret the Quran and Sunnah in very individualistic ways. I was actually thinking, should I do the chapter of neighbors? Because one of the things I find that is very lacking in Canada is our attention to neighbors. First of all, the family atmosphere that we have. You know, I'm not saying I'm good at this either. Like everyone's sitting in their own room, right? I know your parents probably talk about this, but the reason why they talk about it is because when they grew up back home, that wasn't the culture. But that culture is better, to be honest. Like that's not how families are supposed to be like, to be honest, right? You're supposed to be together. You're supposed to have the odd argument, not all the time. Though you're supposed to be able to put aside your individual preferences for the common good. That's the entire purpose of the family, right? Same thing, for example, as in, you know, your neighbors as well. Like neighborly activities are almost absent in a lot of the diaspora here, right? So, very important, right, that we understand that we are affected by culture. You cannot remove culture. You can only mitigate it. Okay? Anything else?
Yeah, we actually have 5 questions.
Oh, so now, go for it. Yeah, let's go through those.
All right, so let's start with question 1. Question: is it that saying that that kind of fitna is also for us to know and recognize who is the best from us? Meaning we can tell people's level as well.
Of course. Yes. We will see the munafiqeen and the believers will be right. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Next question. Some people say that natural disasters are a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the
No, not necessarily. The what's it called? During the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, I mean, I'm guessing this counts as natural disaster, plague. Okay? There was a huge plague during the time of Umar al-Khattab's rule, and Mu'adh bin Jabal passed away famously in that. Okay? He refused to leave the city even though Umar al-Khattab allowed him to, because he said, I will follow the hadith of the Prophet and stay here. Because the advice of the Prophet is what? That you stay where you are when there's a plague. Don't move, otherwise you spread the plague around, right? So Mu'adh bin Jabal refused to leave, even though Umar al-Khattab made a special excuse for him, with Mu'adh bin Jabal, right? And he said, no, I'll stay, and he died, he passed away, right? No, this natural disaster, it depends on the people, right? Natural difficulties in general, for the believers, they are purification. For the disbelievers, they are punishment. Again, the munafiqeen, they are punishment. Not for the believers, though. For the believers, they are purification. Because they grow and they increase in iman as a result of it, whereas the rest of them, they despair and they are destroyed because of it within their group.
It's actually clarifying.
Yeah.
Can we say that every situation can either be a test or a punishment depending on the individual? For example, would it be right to say that the situation is a test from that for them, their status is being uplifted, and a punishment for us because we're helpless and can't do anything about it?
Yeah, so if you want to know whether something is a test or punishment for you or for others, look at their deeds. Look at their deeds, look at their iman, look at their akhlaq, look at the kind of person they are. If you see a person who has taqwa, excellent akhlaq, and they're going through severe hardship, that person is likely to be awliya. I'm not saying they guaranteed are, but they're likely are, right? They're from the friends of Allah, they're high up with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But somebody who is corrupt, and then somebody even who is struggling in their faith even, but they're sincere. Somebody who's struggling in their faith and they're sincere though, that's also a positive sign. Because Allah, if you're still being tested, you have weak faith, or you're struggling in your faith, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you, that's a good sign. Okay? Because it means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still wants khair from you. What is the so and the rest of the question was what's right?
The rest of the question was, just in every situation be either a test or punishment?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, so and how do you know it's a punishment? Sorry, how do you know it's even good times can be a punishment, right? If you're an evil person, you know, if you're an evil person, the heart is not sincere, good things for that person are a punishment. Because it makes them comfortable in their sin. It makes them, they think they're doing fine, they're on the right path. I don't believe in God and I never needed it. I want to say something, but I don't think my environment. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. Third question is taking wisdom from history different from considering history as a source of law. For example, we can use history to guide us, but not necessarily legally. I sometimes get confused how to differentiate the two.
No, there's a big difference here too. Legal, there is some intersection, but for the most part, law works differently than history. That's a very broad question. I don't know what else to say besides that. But there's a big difference. Okay, law, the way laws are extracted has different rules from the way wisdoms are extracted from history. They're two completely different things. Okay, and there's two separate fields as well. Yeah.
Next question is, how do you recommend developing critical thinking skills self-study? And if one is interested in studying philosophy, how do you recommend self-studying it? Jazakallah khair.
Where do you start studying philosophy? Critical thinking skills, first of all, I would recommend going through a self-study textbook in logic. The logic is not the same thing as critical thinking. Very important to understand that. Okay, logic and critical thinking are two different things. But logic helps in developing critical thinking. Just like math technically helps in developing. Math is a form of logic. It's not the same thing as verbal logic, but it's a form of logic. It's quantitative logic as opposed to qualitative. So math is still helpful, okay? But I would say definitely developing good critical thinking skills. There's two ways. First of all, logic itself and mathematical reasoning. Okay, the more you do that, the better you're going to get at your critical thinking skills. You're just going to develop those thinking skills. And I would add as well onto that, reading. Okay, reading more knowledge in general will develop your critical thinking as well, because you'll be able to better reflect about these situations in the world and the people around you. So that's logic, reading, knowledge. And also I would say read books by people who are critical thinkers and people who are experts in their fields. People who are established intellectuals in their fields, you should always read their books over others. I'll give you an example, okay? This is probably obscure to you, but keep in mind, try to keep it in mind somewhere for the future. People look down on parenting books. Okay, I started reading parenting books mostly to understand my students. Okay, but eventually I realized, of course, the parenting book comes in handy for parenting too. A lot of parents don't like parenting books because they think they're all subjective. Usually what you find with those people who say that, they're reading the wrong ones. There's parenting books that are written by actual PhDs in psychology, okay, who do counseling, who do therapy with children. Okay, and a lot of them agree on very important things, right? Like a lot of child psychologists and parenting, people who are involved in parenting, counseling, and stuff like that, a lot of them will say like basic facts that are shared by many of them, that a parent should be a parent, right? Not just a friend. There's a whole, like, you guys know Gabor Mate, like, let's say his last name, right? He's like, he's Canadian. He has this book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. You guys need to read the book. It's about basically drug addiction. And it's important to read this stuff because a lot of Muslims don't know drugs. Okay, and so it's about drug addiction, drug addicts basically, and what their world is like. He has one about ADD as well. It's a good place to get started to see what kind of books there exist out there. Dr. Leonard Sachs, Dr. Gabor Mate, and there's others. Okay, but so when you read those, there's a big difference. Same thing with politics. When you read stuff by actual political experts and analysts, it's very different from reading it from like the uncle down the street or the sheikh who just read the news like you the other day. Right? It's very different, two very different things, right? You know, so like it applies to everything. And that's what develops your critical thinking skills, because people who are experts in fields, they already have what you want. So you might as well get it from them. Okay?
And the last Zoom question is, when you said that the best kind of worship is the one that someone does during hardship, what kind of hardship does this refer to? Could it also refer to internal or spiritual trials?
That's a big question. I'm not sure what that is. Internal spiritual trials. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, that's too subjective. I don't know that. Okay.
I'll ask it for clarity.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Question?
He has a question. Yes.
So you mentioned that if you want to be able to differentiate between a test and a punishment,
Yeah.
one differentiating factor is to see whether the person is continuing in worship, continuing drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And also the condition of their heart. Yeah.
Right. And that's how you know it's a test, right? So then if that's true, does that mean that it's like impossible to fail any test?
If you're sincere and you keep up your good deeds, yes, it's impossible.
So tests cannot be failed.
By a righteous, sincere believer, no.
So what does failing a test even mean then?
Failing the test means you lose your iman, or your worship decreases, or your sincerity decreases, or you lose sight of Jannah, or you lose sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in life. The loss, the true loss, guys, is not the loss of material well-being. The true loss is the loss of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life. Okay? That's very important.
Yeah. So then what you just described, isn't that just a punishment?
Right.
You just described like when you go further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right?
That's
That
the
is
punishment.
that, and that's also failing the test.
That's the failure of the test.
Okay. So then everything is a test. It's just
I mean, yeah, technically everything is a test.
Yeah. Okay.
Either fail the test or succeed in the test.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, maybe I'm missing something. I'm not sure.
Like there's some perspectives say actually everything is technically a punishment, where some are like expiation, some are consequences of your sins, and some, but that doesn't actually, like, no matter how you term it, it doesn't take away from the fact that there are whatever hardship you undergo, there's some that lead to your betterment, and there's some that are the consequences of your wrongful action. If you define that as a trial or a punishment, doesn't kind of
It depends on the deeds and the sincerity, like I said, right? So that's what we should be looking at. That's how you know if something is a test or punishment, right? So yes, if the person loses their iman, that's a punishment so that was a punishment then. Or no, that was a test and they failed it. And then they got punished because of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Okay, he has another question, yeah.
so in Islam, one person does not go through hardship, without being compensated by, removal of sin.
Yes.
And there's also that Allah only has those whom He loves.
Yeah.
So if you are living a life of relative ease,
Yeah.
does that mean that you doing something wrong?
It's possible. Relative ease, it depends what you mean by that. But yes, it's possible. Right? Yeah, it's possible. Okay. You shouldn't want to put yourself in hardship, but when you do notice that you're just enjoying luxuries and whatever not, and your deeds are not there, that's a really bad sign. Okay, that is the dangerous sign. Where your deeds are decreasing, for example, that is a bad sign. Yes. I mean, you can either use very basic terms of phenomenology or something, I don't know. But like if it feels bad, it's bad. Mental health conditions? For sure. Test from Allah. Sure. I have an article on my blog. I'm not sure if people know my blog yet. It's my own experience with mental health. So, I developed anxiety and panic disorder while studying Islam. So it's definitely a hardship. My experience. It's not fun, right? So yeah, it's for sure. Anything that negatively affects you, causes you pain, whether emotional, spiritual, mental, physical, it's a hardship. Right?
One
Yeah.
person in Zoom wants you to repeat the hadith about doing good deeds during hard times.
العبادة في الحرج كهجرة إلينا. So worship in the time of calamity and catastrophe is like doing hijrah to me, like migrating to me.
And one more person is asking, can you please recommend some books on logic? If you can't think of any now, could you please post on the social media?
Yeah. So there was a book actually I used. I'll post it. Okay, but there was a book I used. So I taught Sulam al-Munawwar, which is a classical Arabic text in logic. Mostly Aristotelian. There's different types of logic, right? So it's the old type of logic, Aristotelian Greek logic, which still technically functions in some ways. but then there's newer forms of logic too, like prepositional and predicate logic and stuff. I actually use this like self-study text to like make it easy for myself to teach those, because I read like more theoretical stuff about those. I'll post stuff. I thought I did though. No, I forgot to. No, I did, yeah. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember. I'll post it, inshallah, for sure. You do what?
Plug your blog, because every lecture, the blog article gets mentioned, the website's not there, you know?
Yeah. That's the truth. I don't have a card like I can't link my blog. So pretentious. Anyways, look, I have a blog. Yeah. Anything else? Are you ready? All right. Anybody else?
All right, if that's all the questions, it's not all the questions. Okay, go ahead.
If not all the questions, yes.
So following the questions that people have already asked, like, see if, to determine whether something is a punishment or a reward, would it also be a good litmus test that if, you know, the situation that you are in, does it take you closer to Allah or does it take you away from Allah?
Yes.
So it's a reward.
Yeah. Like for example, you're going through a time in which you have plenty, and it's taking you towards Allah. That's a good thing, right? And you're going through a time of hardship, which is taking you away from Allah. That's not good. Just because hardship isn't good, right? So that's good question. So, yes.
Kind of lost about that. I think it's
What faculty are you in? Sorry.
pardon me?
What faculty are you in?
What faculty am I in?
Yeah.
Like study wise?
No, but like I don't know. Preference of cake, of course, the school. Right? Sorry, just because the way you're dressed, I find it very impressive. What would we get? What's that?
Student communication culture.
Okay, that explains.
The ones we-
No?
look at the ones we-
I like that. No, it's good, yeah.
Sorry, the question was, I think I think I speak for myself, but I think, generally it's far easier to turn from Allah in terms of hardship. But when, you know, you're blessed with the time to use actually, you lose sight of what really matters, right? Like, what are some practical takeaways to?
I think that's subjective to people
Yeah.
and the situation as well. Some times of ease are much more difficult to turn to Allah in than others. Some are easier, right? Some times of hardship, there's people who completely lose their faith in times of hardship. All right, so I think it's very subjective for each person and also for each situation as well, right? One of the hadiths we didn't read that's in this chapter as well is the famous hadith of people will wake up a believer and go to sleep a disbeliever. People will wake up a disbeliever and go to sleep a believer. Like people will change like that towards the end of times, right? So it's related to that, right? That it can be anything, right? You have to remember, Shaitan is always trying to. Shaitan is perfect. The fact that atheism is so common now means Shaitan has perfected his art, right? He's perfected his art of pulling people out of Islam, and all that means is we need to up our game. Okay, so you'll try anything, whether it's hardship or ease or anything. Yeah. I think we have a Q&A after as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, for now, let's just officially end this session. So Jazakallah khair for coming, Ustadh. Thank you everyone for attending this session. Jazakallah khair. Obviously, we'll stick around for a bit longer for Q&A, but be sure to fill in the feedback form. Remember that same time next week, and on Thursdays we have a couple of checks, inshallah. Make sure to come with that. And Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.